Hey, I wanted to do a quick update on how I'm doing, what's going on. Since my last video, I have had a lot of people reach out to me since the video I put out, my little talk to the Texas Health and Human Services Committee on Patient Harm. And first I had a woman here in Austin. She said that she's been a train wreck ever since she got the hip. She's about 55, and she knew it was the hip she got, but she didn't know exactly why it was leading to her issues, which were she's been treated for epilepsy, and she is at the point now where she's having to refinance her house because she can't care for herself enough to keep going, keep living. She's like, I literally cannot take care of myself. So I said we should meet and talk because she's never had cobalt and chromium tests. Her surgeon pretty much dumped her right after the surgery, and she's been a train wreck ever since. So I met with her at a coffee shop, and I told her, get the cobalt and chromium blood tests first, and then from there you'll probably want to have a Mars MRI of your hip to see if there are pseudotumors. She doesn't have a ton of pain. I mean, she's not incredibly mobile, but she said that she's not a praying person, but she's such a mess. And about a couple days ago, maybe more than a week ago, she said, I just prayed to God, like, give me some answers. And you could tell she was kind of spooked by it. And she's like, and then I came across your video, and it was like, eureka. But she had no idea about cobalt poisoning, and that it could come from your hip, and what it could do as far as affecting your brain from a seizure perspective or from just a memory loss perspective. So that was pretty staggering that there are people out there who don't even know excuse me, their hips could be causing all these other problems. So next I got a call from a guy who said, I'm frequently in contact with him. He has what he's been told is like a pre-leukemia type of situation going on with his blood, and he's had revision of his metal on metal hip. But he said after hearing what I had to say in the Texas Health and Human Services video, he said, that's something I've never really talked about. How he's like, I ran it was like it or something. He said, I was a manager of those for years. He's about 60, and he's like, I was always just cool. When you're dealing with people, you have to just always keep your cool as a manager. And he's like, for the years I had those hips, I would describe it as just, I was just getting really mad, and it was out of line. It was things that were not congruent with my character. And he's like, he's like, I just freaked out a lot. And he's had the revision, and he said he feels better now. He's not having those types of things, but the personality and behavior disorder type stuff that I mentioned in my video seemed to really resonate with him. And so he just wanted to call and touch base. And then he just texted me yesterday and said that he got another Mars MRI. He's had the metal hip removed, but the pseudotumors in his leg keep growing, and that was kind of scary to hear. That I don't know if your body's still collecting the cobalt and chromium and the metal debris, and even after you get the hip removed, or if it could be coming from the trunnion of the other parts of his hip. I don't know. Anyway, also another guy from wrote and said that he had just had surgery, both eyes, for let's see, what was it? Retinas, torn retinas. I was going to say detached retinas, but torn retinas. And he's like, it's not in my family. The surgeon admitted it could be from the cobalt poisoning. He's very angry and very sad. He was a lifelong pilot and still could be, he's of the age where he could still have a career, but the tremor, the Parkinson's-like tremor in his hand, he couldn't do the throttle correctly because of what was going on with the shaking, which is also another symptom that Dr. Steve Tower mentions that he notices among his patients. Also, my friend in North Carolina, getting all these calls from strangers and email and text messages, I thought I should check on her. She happened to be in the hospital again. She had another event with her heart. She has AFib. She's one that didn't know either she had one metal on metal Pinnacle hip from Johnson & Johnson DePuy, and she went into the hospital in Durham and North Carolina, and that's where she was told, you have a metal hip that's failing and the cobalt from it is killing your heart. So she's had years of painful, she got a defibrillator at age like 45 or so. She's had multiple cardiac ablation surgeries. That's when they go in, they burn the inside of the chambers of your heart to stop the tachycardia that happens, that really rapid heartbeat that happens when your heart is struggling because it's dying, because the cobalt has scarred the walls of the heart, so it can't beat properly. It's not a muscle, it's scar tissue. It's slowly becoming that. So she had another cardioversion event, and she had to have another surgical ablation. It's just staggering. So one of the guys that reached out, one from I'd never heard from before, one from one person said, look, I have gotten in the past couple of days a settlement offer. Came, you know, I think his attorney warned him it was coming, but it came in the mail through FedEx, an envelope, and it was a settlement offer from J&J. His attorney said J&J is working with, you know, my clients. He had about 100 or so clients, and is offering them a settlement. Then later, the next day or two, in the past couple of days, we've seen it get out into, like, I think Bloomberg did a report quoting Judge Kincaid, who's the judge handling all these Pinnacle Bellwether trials, and in fact that J&J was trying to settle with a third or so of the 10,000 people who have sued J&J related to the Pinnacle. From my one source, he said, you know, it was a $150,000 offer. You pay all your past expenses, you pay all your future medical expenses, you reimburse your insurance company for its expenses related to getting the bad hip, and any other like for me, I have revision, that's another couple $100,000 for, well, probably, I think at last check it was at $177,000 just for the hospital, just for my revision alone. I also had, of course, the dislocation in July.
We're here at the hospital. Franny's getting prepped to go in and have her left hip reduced. She's got a few things she wants to say to the kids.
I love you, Scott. I love you, Scott.
I love you too.
Yeah. Okay, let me get some. Alright, we'll be real careful with
I don't even know what that bill is for the ambulance ride and the operating room cost and the surgeon who reduced my hip. Anyway, about this settlement, he said J&J admits no wrongdoing, no fault, no future responsibility for any health problems you have in the future. It takes no responsibility whatsoever for anything. And of course, you pay all your attorney fees, which usually are about 40% of whatever the settlement deal is. So his attorney told him, you know, most of the patients will receive, who got this particular settlement offer from J&J, would receive about $40,000 or $50,000. And this guy was so sweet. He's like, look, I'm such a train wreck. I'm on so many meds. He's like, I dislocate every time if I have to get on my hands and knees to crawl under the bed and get my bedroom slipper, I dislocate. So he's just been through hell, and he's older than me, but would have been still of the working age. And he's like, my wife's had to care for me for so long, and $50,000 just isn't much, but he's like, I just want to do something nice for her, and he doesn't feel like there will be anything else in the future, which I agree. So anyway, he's like, I'm gonna take it, because he was saying, I feel bad, I feel like I'm selling out, and I'm like, look, you've got to do what's best for your family. The other thing is included in this settlement offer from J&J, at least his, was a non-disclosure agreement. Of course, that you would never be able to tell anyone what you received from the company, but also that you could never talk about what happened to you. And to me, I could never sell my ability to be silent, just because I feel like the laws that caused this to happen to me and all of us are still in place, and that means it could happen to anyone. Untested medical products, medical devices are just being slapped on the market. That doesn't appear like it's ever going to change. When the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists came out with its big report and series of reports when they looked into medical devices worldwide, the FDA responded the next day saying, we're going to change how 510K, but they just basically said, we're just going to say that you can't use a predicate device to get the passage of a new device if the predicate device is more than 10 years old.
If you're looking at a predicate that's been on the market for 10 years, that's a lot of experience. I think the concern is going to be on the side of the industry, where they're going to say, well, all these products that are currently on the market got to the market by comparing themselves to older devices. It might have been easier. Now it's going to be harder for us. There's going to be some concern that it could be raising the standards for approval, making it a little harder. I don't see it that way, because if you're bringing a new technology to the marketplace and you compare yourself to a technology that has more capabilities, you're going to come to market with a better label, and it's going to make you more competitive.
And I'm thinking, man, the ones that are 10 years old, we have some idea of how they're doing in the marketplace because we're the test guinea pigs. It's the newer devices that are used to pass even newer devices, through 510K, get them on the market without human clinical trials. So essentially what the FDA is doing is saying, we're not going to let you use a really old device to get your new device on the market. And I'm like, well, the really old ones are more reliable. Like, we at least know how they're doing. It takes years for us, the public, because we don't have a joint registry, to know when a device is failing and hurting people. So the changes that Scott Gottlieb, or the FDA, announced it was going to make, it seems like smoke and mirrors to me. So I think about, what amount fixes my family. Nothing fixes what broke in us and what I want. You can't ever give my kids normal childhood, the childhood they would have had. You can't ever give them back that sense of security that their life's going to be good. It's going to be okay. I've tried. I'm trying. But, when you're 7 to 15, when this happens to you, when you see what happened to me happen to your mom, like, it changes you. And my kids are changed. They're forever changed by this. So, it's not, I don't want money. Like, money doesn't fix it. What I want is the security that if my daughter gets in a car crash, 5 years from now, breaks a hip, she's unconscious, I don't want the doctor to be able to slap into her some untested medical device. Or, heaven forbid, in 20 or 30 years, my son has a heart attack. I don't want them implanting him with some defibrillator that got passed through 510K. So anyway, I said to this gentleman who called me and was feeling really bad, feeling like he needed to take the settlement, that he is so destitute that $50,000 just feels like a lifeline. And I'm like, dude, you got to do what's best for your family, and don't you feel bad about, in your words, selling out. I'm like, there are enough of us who aren't going to take any amount to be quiet, and because it's just wrong, and we've got to protect future people. So, yeah, it's been a really hard week because I put out that video, and that caused a lot of people to reach out to me and say, hey, I've been watching your videos all along, and I couldn't respond because I had to sign a gag clause, a non-disclosure agreement, as a condition of filing suit. I didn't realize that some attorneys make you sign non-disclosure agreements when they file on your behalf, file suit against these companies. And so it just hit me. There are a lot more victims than we know about right now, because some are being forced into the shadows by their own attorneys saying you can't even have a Facebook account, you can't even have an Instagram account or Twitter or YouTube, you can't even like a post about medical harm. So one of the people who called me said, you know, please know that, you know, we can't respond to you and we can't let you know we're here, but we really appreciate what you're doing. And that, you know, one guy said, like, I couldn't have made it without your stuff because it let me know I wasn't alone. And that really broke my heart, that so many people feel alone in this. I thought, well, you know, what if this happened, you know, like when it did happen in the 60s and 70s, there was no internet, so victims couldn't find each other and connect. Well, now, because of these non-disclosure agreements being required by the attorneys, and then if you do end up taking a settlement, you can't ever tell people what happened to you. So you can't warn future people. You can't go on and be an advocate. You're even more forced into the shadows as you're dealing with this big, awful thing. So between the people who don't know that it could be a medical device implant that's poisoning their brain and causing their personality to change or causing them to have seizures or memory loss or whatever, and then the people who are silenced not only by their own attorneys but then by the company that did this to them, it just made me realize this is an even bigger problem than I understood. And for that reason, you know, it's I describe it as staggering. It's just staggering. So you know, I don't know what I'd do about it, but I'll just keep fighting. I guess we write our Congress and let them know this happened, ask them to change 510K, ask for a mandatory joint registry where all adverse problems, all adverse responses to an implant have to be reported, and unique serial numbers on all our devices, and penalties for medical professionals who fail to report problems with devices. Because as we now know, some of the surgeons are in bed with the companies that make these products through lucrative consulting agreements, buying their allegiance. So, you know, there's an incentive being put in place by the drug companies to keep the doctors from reporting the problems that they do find. So we're down to just the doctors with the most integrity are the only ones that say, hey, there's a problem. And sometimes that comes with the consequence of their reputation gets trashed and they're written off as an outlier or a quack or maybe a bad surgeon, as so many of the whistleblowers with the Pinnacle hip were kind of written off to be. So I would say, as I told some of these people who called me, you know, I don't see anything ever shutting me up. This offer that comes down to about $50,000 for the Pinnacle victims, for some of the people who've sued, feels like, I mean, just hush money. I mean, that doesn't even cover our medical expenses from the past. Like, God forbid, you know, we find out later that this really does lead to a blood cancer or a bladder cancer, or kidney, or, you know, the organs that were involved in filtering this stuff out of our bodies. You know, we just don't know what the long-term effects of having your vital organs bathed in cobalt, chromium, nickel, molybdenum. We don't know what the effects are. So I would, you know, I would never take anything like that. Not when it comes with a gag clause, because I feel like not talking about this puts future generations at risk. And just my friend Dolores, who's just such a mess, stuck in a wheelchair. Her family's left her. She's in Ireland, I believe, and she's life in a wheelchair. I mean, she's been fighting for years. She can't even get money for physical therapy to try to help her get out of pain. And, you know, she said, we can't lose another generation to this nightmare. We can't let this happen to another generation. So I don't think anyone's listening, but I'll keep squawking and talking. That's the latest as I know it. I pray you're doing well, and thank you for reaching out. And for those of you who can't, you know, I understand. We just pray for change.